My name is Lena Caldwell. I'm 38 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I run a mediation firm that specializes in family inheritance disputes. I help broken families stay out of courtrooms and out of each other's throats. Ironically, I've never managed to resolve the one dispute that matters most to me, my place in my own family. This past July, my parents told me again that there wouldn't be enough space for me at the annual family getaway. They said it so casually, so politely, like I'd understand, like I wouldn't ask questions. But then they invited 200 people, all 10 of my siblings, their spouses, their children, their in-laws, even a few cousins I hadn't seen since grade school, and me, not even a mention. I didn't say a word. I didn't protest. Instead, I made a phone call. 10 hours later, my mother was screaming. But to understand why that moment mattered, you have to go back. You have to know what came before the silence. You have to know how quiet rejection can echo louder than rage. I was the 5th child out of 11, middle of the line, the forgettable link. My siblings all found clear lanes: medicine, finance, engineering, law, marriage. Lots of marriage. My parents, Charles and Marlene, built their lives on order, on predictability, on presenting the perfect image. And I colored outside every single line they drew. I didn't go to church the way they liked. I didn't vote the way they voted. I didn't marry. I didn't have kids. Instead, I started a business that helped women escape abusive marriages and elderly clients reclaim stolen inheritances. To them, that wasn't a career. It was a phase. To me, it was saving lives. 3 years ago, the family retreat started changing. It was no longer come if you can. It became invite only. That first summer, I received a text just 2 weeks before the event. Lena dear, we've had to limit the guest list this year. Just keeping it small and cozy. Hope you understand, I did, or I tried to. Until I saw my brother's wife posting photos from the lakeside property, with 60 people laughing wine-glass tanned and barefoot in the grass. That was the first time. The second year, I didn't even get a message. I found out through a tagged post my youngest sister had uploaded a video of a bonfire toast. I was watching from my apartment alone with Thai takeout and briefs due at midnight. I told myself I was too busy anyway. But this year, this third year, something different cracked open in me. The day the message came, it was shorter, colder. Sorry, Lena, no space this year. We'll miss you. I stared at that sentence for a long time. No space, no space. 14-bedroom lake house, 2 detached guest cottages. An event that lasted a full week, and no space. I almost deleted the text. I almost shrugged. Until my niece Cora accidentally posted a glimpse of the printed itinerary to her Instagram story. I paused the video. I zoomed in. 202 confirmed guests. I stared at the paper through the blur. My name wasn't there. It wasn't about room. It never had been. It was about removal. I wasn't too far, too busy, too unavailable. I was simply too inconvenient. That night I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I opened my drawer and pulled out a blank legal pad. And I wrote the words, "The Quiet Table." I had no intention of revenge, no plan to compete. But I had spent a decade helping other people resolve family betrayals with grace and structure. Maybe it was time to apply that to myself. So I booked a vineyard estate 25 miles south of Lake Arrowhead. It was quiet, spacious, elegant without being loud. I used my own savings, canceled the vacation to Barcelona I'd been planning for months. I called in favors clients who owed me, vendors who remembered what I'd done for them. And then I sent 12 invitations. I chose each person for a reason. None of them would be on my parents' guest list, but all of them understood what it felt like to be left out of something you thought was yours. When the confirmations started rolling in, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. That was 2 weeks ago. And now I was sitting in a car at the edge of a vineyard, watching the sun stretch across rows of grapes. My phone buzzed with a text from Cora. "Aunt Lena, Mom is freaking out. Did you really rent a vineyard for your own retreat?" I didn't answer. I just stepped out of the car, walked into the house, and started setting the table. One long table under the stars. 12 chairs, one of them symbolically left empty, for anyone who thought they didn't belong. When I was little, the Lake Arrowhead Getaway meant something entirely different. It wasn't a curated show. There were no itineraries, no matching outfits, no signature cocktails. Just damp towels flung over porches, kids shrieking in the shallows, and my grandmother June standing by the cast-iron stove, humming hymns as she stirred her cinnamon stew. I used to sit on a stool near the fireplace watching her hands. They were always in motion, needing braiding seasoning. But when she paused, it was to look at us, to really see us. She noticed everything. Who was quiet that morning? Who had dirt on their knees? Who needed a second serving not because they were hungry, but because they were hurting? She had this look, half smile, half knowing. A softness that made you want to tell her things you didn't even know were sitting on your chest. I remember the sound of wood crackling in the fire, my brothers chasing each other with pine cones, my sisters braiding each other's hair on the dock. I remember laughter that wasn't forced, moments that weren't for show. And I remember the shift when it all stopped. Grandpa died first, peacefully in his sleep with the windows open and jazz playing from the kitchen radio. Grandma followed 6 months later. Her passing was quieter and somehow heavier, like the light went out in the house itself. After that, everything changed. My parents, Charles and Marlene, took over the summer tradition, but they didn't preserve it. They reinvented it. What was once a family memory became a networking opportunity. Dad brought in real estate clients. Mom invited her philanthropic circle. Suddenly there were caterers, branded wine glasses, a hashtag. You needed a formal invitation just to show up. And slowly the list of who belonged began to shrink while the guest count kept growing. At first I tried to adapt. I dressed up. I smiled at strangers in pastel linen. I nodded through stories about hedge funds and private schools. But I never quite fit. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I didn't manage portfolios or volunteer at the club. I ran a firm that handled domestic abuse settlements and messy estate cases. I worked long hours. I spoke in court. I didn't bake banana bread. Then came the day I won the National Legal Advocate Award. It was the biggest recognition of my career. I stood in a ballroom in Chicago holding a plaque engraved with my name, trying not to cry, as they described how my firm had helped over 100 women find safety and independence. I flew home the next morning still wearing the same navy dress, still running on adrenaline and hotel coffee. I walked into my parents' house for Sunday brunch, expecting what A mentioned, A smile, A we saw the live stream, nothing. My mother barely looked up from her seat. You should do something more practical, Lena, she said, cutting into her fruit tart. Something with growth potential. I didn't respond. I didn't ask why helping women escape violence wasn't considered growth. I didn't bring up the award or the standing ovation or the tears I saw in the audience. I just nodded and poured myself tea. That's how it started. Not with a fight, not with a dramatic door slam, but with a series of quiet moments where I realized I was no longer being seen. At least not as me. I started declining weekend invites. I stopped offering updates. I attended the retreats less often than not at all. And the more I stepped back, the more my absence went unnoticed. It's a strange thing to disappear slowly. You think someone will call, that someone will say, "Hey, where have you been?" But no one does. Because they didn't notice the silence. Or worse, they preferred it. I kept working, kept building my firm. I bought a small house on the east side, fostered a greyhound named Olive who had more trauma than I did. I tried to tell myself I didn't care, that I didn't need their attention or their approval. But there's something about family silence that's different from regular silence. It doesn't echo, it settles, it sinks. And by the time I realized how deep I'd sunk, it was too late to climb back in the way I used to. So I stopped trying. That was the year I started setting my own table. Literally, one chair, one plate, one candle, every Sunday evening. I didn't think of it as rebellion. It wasn't some cinematic protest. It was just space, the only kind I still had. And for a long time, it was enough. Until this year, until I realized that the space they left for me wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. It was structural. It was silence weaponized. And that's when I decided if I couldn't fit into theirs, I'd build my own. There's something liberating about not being expected. When I realized they wouldn't invite me to the family retreat again, I didn't get angry. I got focused. I opened my calendar. I looked at the dates they always chose, same week every July, like clockwork, and I circled them. Then I pulled out a yellow legal pad and wrote a name at the top, the quiet table. It wasn't meant to be dramatic. It wasn't even meant to be seen. It started as a whisper of an idea, something between a retreat and a refuge. A place where people like me, people who didn't get seats, could come and just exist. No explaining, no qualifying, no code switching or dress codes or smile through it pressure. I wasn't planning a party. I was creating space. The vineyard came first. I'd visited it once years ago for a client's wedding. Tucked just outside Lake Arrowhead, it was secluded and serene, with old stone walls and flowering vines that draped like poetry. The estate had 6 guest rooms, a garden terrace, and a long table carved from a single redwood slab. The owner remembered me. She gave me a discount. Then came the guest list. 12 people. That's all I wanted. Not a crowd, just connection. Each name I wrote down meant something. Each person had lived through their own version of being erased. There was Camille, my college roommate, who came out at 21 and was told not to attend Christmas anymore. There was Reverend Alicia, a former pastor who was pushed out of her church after preaching a sermon on reproductive justice. There was Marisol, one of my oldest clients, who had lost custody of her kids during a divorce, because the court couldn't see past her accent and her silence. There was my paralegal Elias, who'd once been introduced at a family dinner as my coworker by his own brother. And there was Aunt Delilah, my father's only sister, long estranged. She had worn red to her own mother's funeral and had been excommunicated ever since. These were people who didn't need explanations when I said they said there wasn't space. They knew exactly what that meant. When I sent the invitations, I didn't use fancy cardstock. No gold foil, just a digital note with a question at the top. Have you ever been told without words that your presence is a problem? The responses came fast, and then came the stories. Camille wrote, I don't remember the last time someone asked me to show up without changing something first. Alicia said, this feels like the first real invitation I've received in years. Marisol didn't say much. She just replied with a heart. That was enough. I planned slowly, deliberately. The meals would be communal, everyone helping out like the old retreats used to be, before they became catered and choreographed. Mornings would start with journaling and silence. Afternoons for walks or workshops if people felt like it. Evenings would be open music, firelight, soft wine, soft chairs, and softer hearts. And in the center of it all, a long table, 12 seats. But I'd set 13. One chair would always be empty. Not for drama, not for ghosts, but for the person who wasn't invited somewhere else that week. For the one whose absence hadn't even been noticed. A reminder that someone's missing didn't have to mean they were gone. That empty chair, that was the first motif. I remembered something my law professor had once told me in passing years ago. After I wasn't chosen for a summer internship, everyone said I'd earned. She said, Lena, when they don't give you a seat at the table, don't beg. Don't break it. Bring your own damn bench and let others sit too. At the time, I laughed. But now her words held weight. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about reclaiming something, not the table. The right to take up space, and I wasn't planning to ask for permission again, so I finalized the schedule, confirmed the chef, a queer woman who had left the restaurant world, after being constantly belittled, and created a private event site. No hashtags, no sponsors, no performance, just presence. The day before the retreat, I packed my car carefully, books, tea, soft blankets, a vase I'd inherited from Grandma June. I slid the 13th chair into the back seat, a simple wooden one I'd refinished myself over winter break. It didn't match the rest. That was the point. When I pulled out of my driveway, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't even thinking about my family anymore. I was thinking about the table and the people who would finally get to sit. The first morning of the retreat felt like a long exhale after years of holding my breath. The vineyard woke slowly. Golden light spilled over the hills, soaking into the rows of vines like honey. A breeze moved through the lavender bushes near the terrace, rustling them just enough to make a sound soft and crinkling, like pages being turned. I walked barefoot on the stone patio, a cup of coffee in hand, listening. Laughter, low and easy, floated from the guest rooms. Someone was already slicing fruit in the kitchen. I heard music, 2 faint piano chords, playing from someone's speaker. No one had spoken to me yet that morning. They didn't need to. The silence here wasn't empty, it was generous. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you could hear your own heartbeat again. I stood by the long wooden table and touched the 13th chair just to ground myself. It was real. This was all real. Delilah arrived just after 9. She pulled up in a silver Subaru with one cracked taillight and a bumper sticker that said, "Well-behaved women rarely make history." She stepped out wearing a wide-brimmed hat, oversized sunglasses, and a linen shirt covered in paint smudges. "Hope you still have coffee," she said, stretching her arms as if she owned the sunlight. I smiled. "Only if you want it strong and judgment-free." Delilah hadn't changed much. Her hair was fully white now, cropped short and wild. Her voice carried the same mischief I remembered from childhood. The way she used to sneak me lemon squares and whisper, "Don't let your mom see." She hugged me without hesitation. I didn't realize how much I needed it until her arms were around me. "You did this," she said into my shoulder. "You actually did it." "I did," I said quietly. "And you came." "Of course I did." "You made space." We sat by the garden wall facing the vineyard. The sun warmed our backs, and the scent of rosemary and wet stone filled the air. For a while we said nothing. Then Delilah spoke. "You know they stopped inviting me too, right?" she asked, sipping her coffee. I turned to her. "I didn't. They stopped around the time I hit 50. Right after I told them I wasn't getting married. Ever." I blinked. "That was decades ago." She smiled grimly. "Exactly. Long enough for it to become a family tradition." I tried to picture it, Delilah being pushed out quietly without confrontation. No loud argument, no slamming doors, just fewer calls, fewer questions, less space, until there was none left. "I always thought they just didn't like your politics," I admitted. Delilah laughed. "They didn't. But that wasn't why. It was the unmarried thing, the no kids thing, the life on her own terms thing. People like us mess with their blueprint." I looked out at the vines, their orderly rows stretching to the horizon. "We're weeds in their garden." "No," she said. "We're wildflowers. They just don't know how to name us." That stuck with me. Wildflowers. Not a mistake. Just unexpected. I wanted to ask her how she coped all those years, how she held on to herself without becoming bitter or small. But before I could, someone called my name from the terrace. Marisol had arrived. Elias was making scones. Reverend Alicia was setting out cushions under the wisteria. Retreat had begun. I stood up ready to greet my guests, but Delilah caught my hand before I left. "They used to call you names behind your back, you know." I paused. "I figured. They said you were the shadow child, always brooding, always too serious." I felt something flicker in my chest. Not quite anger, not quite grief, just recognition. "Shadow child," I repeated. "They didn't understand that shadows are cast by light." She let go of my hand and winked. "Go host your revolution." The rest of the day unfolded like a poem. People arrived and found each other without needing introductions. Camille and Alicia discovered they had both been part of the same women's rights campaign in 2009. Marisol taught Elias how to fold dough for empanadas. We laid out blankets on the grass and read aloud from books we loved. Someone cried during a story. Someone else passed them a napkin without a word. There were no speeches, no schedule, no performances, just presence. And underneath it all, a quiet knowing, shared and unspoken, that each of us had been removed from someone's table before. That each of us had once wondered silently if we were the problem. That morning, I had looked around at all the faces and thought maybe we were never the problem. Maybe we were just too whole to be edited. That night, as the sun slipped behind the hills and candlelight flickered across the long table, I sat in the 13th chair, just for a moment. It didn't feel empty. It felt claimed. It happened on the second afternoon. We had just finished a slow lunch on the terrace, roasted vegetables, fresh bread basil picked from the garden that morning. Elias was setting up a poetry station in the courtyard. Camille and Alicia were sketching barefoot in the sun, trading old stories like seashells. And then I saw the car. Black, polished, familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten before I even saw her. It pulled up to the vineyard gate with a slow, deliberate glide. The kind of entrance that wanted to be noticed. And it was. Marlene Caldwell stepped out, heels clicking against stone sunglasses perched like armor. She scanned the estate the way a realtor surveys a foreclosure judgment, first curiosity, second. I didn't move right away. Instead, I stood still, watching my mother take in the scene bougainvillea, crawling up the columns, soft music from an old speaker. Wind chimes clinking against a slow breeze. She looked so out of place I almost felt sorry for her. She spotted me and marched over with the controlled rage of someone used to being obeyed. "What is this?" she demanded. I stayed calm. "A gathering." "Don't be clever, Lena." "Is this your way of getting back at us?" Public humiliation. I shook my head. "This isn't about you." She glanced at the guests, then back at me. "You've made quite the spectacle." "I've made space," I replied evenly. "Something I've learned to do." Her jaw clenched. "You've embarrassed this family." I didn't flinch. I was erased from it before I ever got the chance. That landed. She blinked once, then twice, and her voice grew sharper. "We told you we didn't have room. You didn't have to make it a movement." I looked past her for a second at Delilah, who had stepped onto the patio, silent but steady. "You didn't tell me you didn't have room," I said. "You told me I didn't belong." "That's not true," she snapped. "It is," I said. "Maybe not in words, but in every absence. Every year I didn't get the invite. Every excuse about space while 200 other people made the cut." She stepped closer, lowering her voice, like she was afraid someone would hear. "You could have addressed this privately." "No," I said. "Because this wasn't private. Exclusion never is. You just assume silence means agreement." "I expected better from you," she whispered. "I thought you were above this kind of petty rebellion." I smiled, not cruelly, just enough to steady myself. "This isn't rebellion, Mom. This is healing. You pushed me out." I didn't push back. I stepped sideways and made something better. Her hands tightened around her purse strap. "You don't get to rewrite history," she said. "I'm not rewriting it. I'm refusing to repeat it." She looked down at the 13th chair. I could see it registering, its plain design, its deliberate placement, the symbolism she didn't want to acknowledge. "You brought your own table," she said bitterly. "Yes," I said. "And a chair." Because I was tired of waiting for one. The air between us stretched tight and trembling. I saw something then, not fury but fear, not anger but loss. Her mouth opened like she wanted to say something softer, but it never made it out. Instead, she turned, walked back to her car, didn't look back. But her last glance before she turned her head wasn't sharp. It was shaky. And that stayed with me longer than the confrontation. I didn't follow her. I didn't replay the moment out loud to the others. I returned to the terrace, helped Elias arrange the poetry cards, and sat beside Marisol as she folded napkins into cranes. The wind had picked up slightly. The chimes were louder now. I thought of Grandma June, how she would have stood at the edge of the garden, hands on her hips, nodding slowly at the sight of 12 people finding home in each other. I thought of all the chairs I'd been denied over the years, at dinners, at ceremonies, and conversations where my name was omitted on purpose. And I thought of the one I had placed at the head of this table, my chair, my space. Later that evening, I wrote a note and tucked it under the 13th chair cushion. It said, "This seat is for the one who was told there wasn't enough room." Because there is. There always was. I never meant for it to go public. That was the truth. There were no flyers, no hashtags, no press releases. I didn't even post a single photo. But sometimes light slips through the cracks, no matter how tightly you close the door. It started with Camille. She shared a photo of our first dinner, the table glowing under strings of soft bulbs. 12 faces turned toward candlelight and conversation. No names, no tags. Just a caption that read, "Real connection is louder than noise." Then Elias posted a picture of the 13th chair, empty and waiting with a single flower resting on the seat. His caption was shorter, "Not everyone needs to be invited to belong." By the second morning, 3 more photos had made their way online. Delilah laughing in the kitchen, Alicia reading a poem in the vineyard, a bowl of peaches beside an open book. Still no names, still no location. But the internet doesn't need much to connect dots. That afternoon, while I was rinsing blueberries in the kitchen, my phone buzzed. It was Cora, my niece, 19, bright, observant, more like me than she probably realized. She texted first, "Aunt Lena. Are you free to talk?" I dried my hands and called her. She picked up immediately. "Okay, so you didn't hear this from me." I smiled. "Hi, Cora," she sighed. "Hi. But seriously, everyone is talking about your retreat, like at the lake house. It's all over the group chat. Dad showed Mom some pictures. She got super tense. Grandma cried. Grandpa walked out. I sat down slowly, phone pressed to my ear. I didn't post anything, I said. I know, she replied. But your people did. It's beautiful, by the way. Peaceful. Like the kind of thing I'd actually want to be part of. You know, I didn't answer right away. She lowered her voice. They're calling it a stunt. But it doesn't look like one. It looks kind. Like you built something instead of destroying something. I did, I said quietly. I'm glad, she whispered. Even if they're not. We talked a few minutes more about college, her photography internship, the books she was reading. I hung up feeling equal parts grounded and exposed. By sunset, the messages started coming. A former client, a retired judge, a woman I once mentored at the legal aid office, people I hadn't spoken to in years. But the message that stopped me came from someone I never expected. Danielle Briggs. We were classmates in law school. We shared a study group, a research fellowship, and 2 awkward dinner parties. She was sharp-poised and well-connected. We graduated the same year, but our paths diverged almost immediately. Danielle joined a prestigious firm. I opened a tiny office above a sandwich shop. When I tried to stay in touch, she responded with short, polite emails. Eventually, not at all. I hadn't thought of her in years. But now her name was lighting up my screen. Subject line, I owe you an apology. I hesitated, then opened it. Lena. I saw the photos. A mutual colleague forwarded them, and I recognized your name. I just wanted to say, I think I missed the point back then. About you, about what you were building. I thought you were foolish for walking away from the game. Now I see you were building something bigger, something more human. I hope we can talk sometime. Danielle. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I needed her validation, not because I wanted to rekindle anything, but because it confirmed what I had only begun to believe, that truth, when quietly lived, can still be heard. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked out to the garden where Alicia was lighting the lanterns. Camille was reading under a tree. Marisol was teaching Cora, yes Cora, who had quietly arrived an hour earlier, how to prepare plantain. There was no platform here, no spotlight. But somehow light was finding us anyway. That night we held a circle by the fire pit. Each person shared something they had been told they weren't enough for. Too loud, too opinionated, too single, too ambitious, too soft, too foreign. When it was my turn, I said simply, I was told there wasn't space. Then I pointed to the 13th chair. Still empty, still waiting, but space isn't given, it's made. A few hours later, as the fire died down, I opened my laptop. And I replied to Danielle, thank you. Sometimes the quiet things speak the loudest. I hope you're listening now. He arrived in the middle of a quiet afternoon, unannounced and alone. No black SUV this time, no driver. Just a dusty silver sedan I hadn't seen since I was 16. It pulled up slowly along the gravel path beside the vineyard tires, crunching like a warning I refused to brace for. I was on the patio folding fresh linen napkins with Elias. We both looked up at the same time. I didn't move at first. My body locked somewhere between reflex and memory. And then he stepped out. Charles Caldwell, my father, still upright, still composed, still in the same navy blazer he wore to church every Sunday morning for the past 30 years. The only difference now was the slight stoop in his shoulders, the way he paused before closing the car door, as if even that action demanded more effort than it used to. He didn't scan the property like my mother had. He didn't glare, didn't speak. He just walked toward me, measured steady, until he stood a few feet away. I saw that he was holding something. An envelope, cream-colored, thick paper, my grandmother June's handwriting across the front, unmistakable. He extended it to me without a word. I took it, fingers trembling just slightly as I slid it open. Inside was a single sheet of stationery folded twice. No date, no greeting. Just her cursive, elegant looping and unwavering. To the one who was left out, you are not wrong. You are not broken. You are simply the one who saw the truth first. That kind of sight is always punished at first. Be steady. The rest will catch up or they won't. Either way, keep building. June. My breath caught in my throat. I read it again slower, let every word settle. I looked up expecting something, a comment, a smirk. maybe even a flicker of pride. But my father said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, heavy and unreadable. He wasn't wearing sunglasses, but I almost wished he were. "You kept this?" I asked. He gave a short nod. For how long, he didn't answer. Just shifted slightly on his feet. I studied his face, the same face that used to tower over me when I was 10 and too loud at the dinner table. The same voice that once told me coldly in front of 2 uncles and a bowl of mashed potatoes, "You're starting to sound like a traitor to this family's values." That was the word he used, traitor, because I'd questioned something. I don't even remember what, probably a policy he supported or a belief he held too tightly. But I remember how quiet the table got after he said it. I remember the ache in my chest as I swallowed my opinion with my orange juice. I never forgot that moment. I don't think he did either. Now, standing in front of me, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was still tall, broad-shouldered, but something in him had deflated, as if a piece of armor had quietly rusted away. I folded the letter and held it against my heart. "Why now?" I asked. "Why bring this today?" Still no answer, but his jaw shifted just barely, and he glanced at the long wooden table behind me. The 13th chair stood out in its quiet defiance, tucked beneath the N-like punctuation. I followed his gaze. "You see it, don't you?" I said. "What this is?" He looked at me then, fully. And for the first time in years, he didn't look through me. He looked at me. I waited, for words, for confession, for closure, but Charles Caldwell had never been a man who said sorry. Instead, he did something rarer. He nodded, just once, a slow, deliberate gesture. Then turned, walked back to his car, and drove off into the California dust. Not a single word, but somehow I understood. That night I took June's letter and framed it. I placed it on the table beneath the lanterns beside the 13th chair. And though my father hadn't said anything, it felt like a beginning, not of forgiveness, not yet, but of acknowledgement. And sometimes that's where healing starts. The final night of the retreat arrived like the closing line of a poem, soft, inevitable, and perfectly timed. The vineyard had turned gold in the evening light, every vine casting long shadows across the lawn, like quiet applause. The table was set under the arbor candles, flickering inside glass lanterns, napkins tied with rosemary sprigs. The 13th chair stood at the head of the table, just as it had each night, quiet, unoccupied, unignorable. Everyone dressed up, nothing extravagant, just their best selves. Camille wore a deep plum shawl. Elias a cream shirt he hadn't dared to wear since his brother's wedding. Alicia had braided her silver hair down her back like a crown. I wore black. Not for mourning, for elegance, for presence. Dinner flowed with laughter and stories. No one checked their phones. There were no toasts, no speeches on the schedule. But after dessert, as dusk settled into full night, Delilah stood. She didn't announce herself. She just rose, lifted her wine glass, and waited. The room quieted, not because she asked, but because everyone wanted to hear her. She spoke slowly, clearly, her voice echoing just enough to make us lean in. "Most of you don't know," she began, "that I haven't been invited to a Caldwell event in 30 years. A few heads turned. No one interrupted. I wasn't cut off with words. Just silence. Fewer calls. No explanation, just less and less room. Until there was none." Her hand hovered near her chest for a moment. Then she smiled. "But Lena invited me, not because I did anything spectacular. Not because I'm someone important. Just because she made space." She looked at me then. Not with pity, with recognition. When they take your seat away, you think you have to fight to get it back. You don't. You build your own table. You bring your own chair. And if you're lucky, someone like Lena will sit beside you. She sat down to the sound of quiet clinks wine glasses, raised in silent solidarity. No one clapped. They didn't need to. Then Alicia turned to me. "Your turn, Lena." I froze, just for a breath. Then I rose. I didn't prepare anything. I hadn't planned to speak. But something in the moment pulled the words from me. "I won't talk about pain," I said. "You already know what that looks like." A few guests nodded. "I want to talk about staying." A pause. Staying soft. Staying open. Staying kind when you've been told you're too much. Or not enough. Or not right for the space. I looked around the table, 12 people, each of them carrying a history of not being chosen. This week didn't fix our stories. It didn't erase the years we were missing from rooms we should have been in. But it gave us one thing they couldn't: each other. I lifted my glass to those who stayed, not in the places that hurt them, but in themselves. Before I could sit, something caught my eye. Movement at the edge of the patio, a shadow near the trees, then the shape of a man, tall, cautious, unsure. I recognized him instantly. Brian, my oldest brother. The one who once called my firm a glorified hobby. The one who joked at Thanksgiving that I was the family's resident feminist with a god complex. He hadn't spoken to me in nearly 2 years. And now here he was standing just beyond the candlelight, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the table like he didn't know where to begin. No one else noticed. The music had resumed. Alicia was pouring more wine, but I saw him. All of him. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just looked at me. And for once he didn't look smug, or defensive, or irritated. He looked quiet. I nodded at him. Not an invitation, not a confrontation, just acknowledgement. He nodded back. Then, without stepping forward, he turned and disappeared into the night. It was enough. Later, when I returned to my room, I found a note slipped under my door. No name, just 3 words written in unmistakably neat capitalized script. You were right, that was all. And it was more than I ever expected. The 13th chair wasn't empty anymore, not because someone had finally sat in it, but because its presence had done what it was meant to do. It had made someone stop. Look, reconsider. That night, as I blew out the candles, I whispered 2 words I hadn't said in a long, long time. Thank you. Not to anyone. To the space itself, to the air, to the girl I used to be waiting at a table she was never going to be invited to, and to the woman I had become who built her own. The morning after the gala dinner was still and blue, like the world hadn't yet decided how it wanted to wake up. I was up early, habit really. I walked the edge of the vineyard barefoot, the grass still cool with dew. There was something sacred in that silence, something that felt like forgiveness in progress. I was pouring coffee back at the main house when I heard footsteps behind me. Not rushed, not hesitant, just quiet. I turned, and there he was, Brian. He looked tired, older somehow than the man who had stood beneath the trees the night before. I didn't want to ruin anything he said without preamble. Last night, I mean. I didn't answer, just waited. He stuffed his hands in his jacket pockets, the same brown suede one he used to wear in college. He rocked back on his heels, stared out the window behind me. I thought I'd feel angry, he said. Coming here, seeing all this. He motioned loosely toward the table still set from the night before, but I didn't. He looked down at the floor. I felt small. He gave a short laugh, humorless and brittle. I was quiet, and I thought that was safe, that it kept me neutral, but it didn't. It just made me complicit. His eyes met mine. My silence hurt you more than any insult could have. There it was, the line, clear and unflinching. I didn't reach for him, didn't soften, didn't perform forgiveness. I just nodded. Once, yes, it did. He winced, but didn't look away. I should have stood up for you, he said. Years ago, when you got the fellowship and Mom said it was just luck. When Dad said law was no place for politics. I let him speak. He needed to. Not for me, but for himself. He took a breath, then exhaled slowly. I came here to say, I'm sorry. I don't expect anything from it. I just needed to say it. A pause. Out loud. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it live for a moment. Then I gestured toward the coffee pot. You want a cup? He blinked. Looked surprised. Sure. I poured one, handed it to him. We stood in the kitchen, 2 grown adults who once built pillow forts, and now stood across a chasm of years we'd both tried to ignore. I'm not ready, I said, to pretend nothing happened. I wouldn't ask you to. But I added, we have breakfast at 8 tomorrow. You're welcome to join. He nodded. His grip on the mug tightened just slightly. Thank you, he said, voice low. We didn't talk more after that. He left the kitchen and I let him. The next morning, the table was fuller than ever. Delilah brought fresh scones. Elias played a Nina Simone record. Camille had her camera out again, snapping candids, laughing when someone caught her mid-shot. And then Brian walked in. Not late, not hidden, just present. He hesitated at the edge of the patio, For a moment, I thought he might turn back. But he didn't. He stepped forward and scanned the table. And there it was, the chair, the 13th one, the one that had stood empty all week. No one had claimed it, not even me. He walked over, gently pulled it out, and sat down. No one applauded. No one gasped. This wasn't a movie, but Alicia did pass him the butter without a word. Elias poured him coffee. Camille smiled. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that follows tension. The kind that follows arrival. That day, for the first time, the chair wasn't just symbolic. It was occupied. It was earned. And even though nothing had been declared, no contracts, no confessions, I felt something shift. A weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying began to lift. Sometimes redemption doesn't come with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes with someone showing up. And sitting down. The final morning of the retreat came with golden light and a soft breeze. The kind of morning that made you believe the world wasn't broken, just in recovery. I sat alone by the fire pit that hadn't been lit in days. The embers from earlier gatherings had cooled, but the warmth lingered in the soil in the air in me. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. "Your father said your retreat was meaningful, more than I expected." He didn't use those words, but I know what he meant. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because it hurt, not because I was angry, but because for the first time it felt unnecessary to respond. There was no "I told you so" in me. Only a quiet understanding. Some conversations speak loudest in silence. I put the phone down and opened my laptop. There was a flagged email I hadn't noticed before, sent 2 days earlier. The subject line read, "From a mother you've never met." I clicked. "Dear Lena, my daughter is 14. Last week she packed a bag and said she was going to run away. She felt unseen, unwanted, like her voice didn't belong in the house she was born into. Last night I found her in her room, crying but smiling. She'd found a video. It was a clip someone posted from your retreat. You weren't speaking in it, just listening to an older woman who looked like she'd lived 5 lives. There was a circle of people around you. No one was interrupting, no one was laughing, just listening. My daughter said, "If a place like that exists, maybe I can stay a little longer. I don't know what you intended to build, Lena. But whatever it was, it reached us. Thank you." I read the message again and again. Then I closed my eyes. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It hadn't been for a while. This retreat, this small rebellion I had organized in response to rejection, had become something else. Not louder, not bigger, just deeper. It had become a mirror for others, for the left out, the overlooked, the quietly aching. In every corner of the retreat, stories had bloomed like wildflowers, some angry, some trembling, some unfinished. And yet each one had been heard, and that had been enough. Delilah joined me by the fire pit. She brought her sketch pad half full of crooked lines and watercolors. She didn't speak, just sat beside me and sighed. Not a tired sigh, a settled one. "Do you think it'll last?" she asked after a while. "The retreat?" I said. "No." She smiled. "The feeling." I thought for a long time before answering. "Maybe not in its full form," I said. "But I think people carry pieces of it back." She nodded. "Like seeds." I turned to look at her. Exactly like seeds. That afternoon, Camille helped me pack up the cushions and signs. Brian loaded chairs onto a truck, occasionally glancing at me but saying nothing, still understanding the limits of what could be repaired in 3 days. Cora found a note someone had left behind under the big oak. It read, "I never thought silence could feel like applause." We left it there. Some things weren't meant to be moved. On the final night, I stood alone in the dining room. The candles were half burned, and the wine glasses were still stained with laughter and long pauses. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt whole. I knew not everyone had come. There were still siblings who hadn't texted, cousins who hadn't noticed, friends who'd scrolled past the photos with blank expressions. But it didn't matter, because enough people had stayed. Enough had listened. Enough had said, "I see you." And maybe, just maybe, that was what healing looked like. Not being welcomed back to the table you were once excluded from, but building your own table, setting your own seats, and watching quietly as people found their way to it. The house had gone quiet again. not the heavy, hollow silence I once associated with being alone, but the kind that felt earned like an exhale after a long, unfinished sentence. I sat in the garden, the air still warm from the day's sun. A breeze moved gently through the lavender, and somewhere in the distance, a screen door creaked. Birds weren't singing. They were just there, present. I reached into the side pocket of my sweater and pulled out the letter, the one my grandmother June had written all those years ago, tucked away in a drawer my father never meant to open. Her handwriting was still the same elegant, slanted, firm. The one who gets left out usually sees the truth first. That line had stayed with me. But it wasn't just about being right. It was about choosing not to let that knowledge harden you, about choosing to build something softer in the face of indifference. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back where it belonged, close to my chest, but not heavy anymore. Then I stood and walked toward the long wooden table beneath the fig tree. Most of the chairs were stacked now, ready to be stored. But I pulled out one, just one, and placed it gently at the head of the table. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass. I looked at the empty chair and smiled. For the one who's late, I whispered. Maybe they'd never come. Maybe they would. But I no longer waited out of desperation. I waited in peace. Because I had already arrived. And that was enough. Not everyone needs to see me for me to be real. Not everyone needs to name me for me to have value. I chose to see myself. And that finally was enough. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.